This is the World War I video presentation part 2. This goes along with chapter 29 and chapter 30. So we ended the last part 1 presentation with the United States getting ready to go to war. So the road to war. We're going to prepare for war and also hopefully maintain peace. So this preparedness for peace. And we kind of left off with the last presentation talking about this immense increase, but this increase from 90,000 soldiers. It's hard to imagine getting ready for World War I with a military of only 90,000 troops. Eventually, of course, the United States has a force in the millions, but because of numerous things, especially this Zimmerman Note that we're going to talk about in the next slide, but because of this full-scale U-boat warfare, Woodrow Wilson breaks off diplomatic relations with Germany, and Congress declares war in 1917. Just a reminder that all of the images within this PowerPoint are in the public domain. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me an email or a phone call. Thank you. The Zimmerman Note, we mentioned that in the homework assignment, but the Zimmerman Note of January 1917, the British cryptographers deciphered this telegram, and it's from Arthur Zimmerman, and it goes to Mexico, to the German minister in Mexico, von Eckert. And so Germany is offering, this is where it gets interesting, Germany is offering to Mexico the opportunity to take back Texas and New Mexico and other territories if Mexico joins the German cause. So this is the intercepted telegram. So the British cryptologists decipher this code. So this is intercepted. And there's a very good site on American Archives where you can go through and it kind of shows you how this is actually deciphered. It's a series of mathematical equations, but this is deciphered by the British intelligence, and this is then the actual note. And so we, meaning the British, we meaning the Germans, intend to begin on the 1st of February unrestricted submarine warfare. And so we shall endeavor to keep America neutral. But in the event that this is not successful, the Germans, make Mexico a proposal for alliance, make war together, make peace together, general financial support, and the understanding that Mexico is to reconquer Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona. The settlement in detail is left to you. So this is deciphered by the British intelligence, forwarded to the Americans and the American newspapers. It's put in the American newspapers, and it becomes obvious that we would rather fight this war in Europe than fight it against Mexico in the United States. And so this is kind of the spark. We have the sinking of Lusitania, the sinking of the Arabic, the sinking of the Sussex Pledge, preparing for war, but also preparing for peace, the build-up, and then finally, 1917, January, we have this Zimmerman Note, kind of the last straw to bring the United States into this war. So with congressional approval, or with Congressional's declaration of war, we have the spring of 1917 and the passage of the Selective Service Act, and so this means the draft is put into place. Those between the ages of 21 and 30 are eligible for this draft. Later it's anyone from 18 to 45. 2.8 million. So we had a force of about 450,000. We'll bring it up to 2.8 million were drafted, and eventually we have lots of volunteers as well. 4.8 million served in the armed forces. Military at the time was segregated, and this Allied Expeditionary or American Expeditionary Force was under the command of John Pershing, otherwise known as Blackjack Pershing. Now, we had to get these troops over there, and the convoy system was used, and these are the routes. We were a little bit fearful of the German submarines, but because we used large convoys of ships, not one U.S. casualty occurred, or at least death occurred on the trip from North America to Europe. So it was a very successful convoy system. No submarine was going to try to attack that kind of a convoy. And these are the routes used. Alright, so the United States finally gets over there in 1917. Spring of 1917. As we said, John Pershing is the commanding officer of the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force. So he's the highest ranking general, and he's very adamant about keeping United States forces together. The United States is supposed to inherit a full front rather than being used to subsidize or to be used as replacements to support the British or the French. The Americans were supposed to have their own quadrant. This becomes very important when at the end of the war the United States can kind of participate in the credit for winning the war instead of just as a bunch of substitutes helping the British and the French win. So Woodrow Wilson and John Pershing were very insistent upon that. So the tidal wave of Americans arrived in summer and fall of 1917. Mobilizing the home front was very important for this war effort, and we had William McAdoo, Secretary of the Treasury, to help finance the war, selling war bonds. We have Liberty bonds and Victory bonds, increase in taxes, so numerous efforts to mobilize the home front. In addition to raising money, another effort was to conserve resources, so the government was interested in rationing. In the Food Administration, Herbert Hoover was put into place. He eventually becomes president in 1928. But increased food production is one thing, increased farm prices and farm production soars, but then also conserve the existing food supplies. So the promotion of meatless days, wheatless days, victory gardens, even some rationing occurred. So mobilizing the United States was much different in World War I and in World War II than it is today. And one other aspect of mobilizing the nation has to do with industry, and Bernard Baruch is in charge of the War Industries Board, and this has to do with setting prices and making sure that labor does not take advantage of the situation, and also making sure that industry does not take advantage of the situation. As profits soar, complaining stops, but some business owners felt that the War Industries Board threatened free enterprise. So setting prices, very socialistic in approach, but not a whole lot of complaining when the nation is at war. Not only do you have to mobilize the nation's factories, but then you also have to regulate and keep in check the workers. So hundreds of thousands of men were drafted, therefore you kind of have maybe a labor shortage. When you have a labor shortage, that's prime opportunity for workers to strike. But unions took advantage of the situation, but there also had to be labor disputes arbitrated by the national government. The migration occurred because of these jobs, these severe labor shortages that were occurring in the northern factories. There's a great migration of southern farmers, southern former slaves, migrating up to the north to the big cities of Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, New York, looking for opportunity in factories. And finally, another big part of mobilizing the nation had to do with this influencing of attitudes in this Committee of Public Information led by George Creel. And this is this propaganda initiative, encourage Americans to show support for the war. So there's a great history when it comes to all of the World War I and eventually World War II, but in particular the World War I posters produced by the Committee of Public Information. So if just Google anything on the internet about World War I posters, and there's dozens upon dozens of posters that if you can find an original one today, they're quite valuable. So these are just a few of those recruitment posters. Of course, I Want You, Uncle Sam, Wake Up America, Civilization Calls. You can just sense the extreme exaggeration. Of course, you have the sexing up of the armed forces, and gee, if I were a man, I would want to join the Navy. And so we also then have the glamorization of joining the services. But these are just a few. You can find dozens of World War I, World War II posters. So World War I, remember that the Germans attack. See if we can draw this real quickly. The Germans attack this way, and they are stalled because the British come in and help the French. Then the Russians attack this way. Now, during this time, there is a Russian communist revolution, and the Germans end up suing for peace with the Russians when Lenin takes over. And so there is a peace settlement that occurs on the Eastern Front. So that allows then the Germans to bring all of their Eastern Front soldiers to join the Western Front. Now this occurs about the same time that the United States is getting in. So we have a front here. We no longer have the front here. The German troops are joining. The other half of the German army is coming, and it's about that time that the United States comes, just in time. So the United States joins this front, and a couple of key battles occur, and the United States, the French, and the British are on the winning side, and we sue for peace. So the end of the war occurs, and Woodrow Wilson is going to make a lot of suggestions, bringing into effect his 14 points. So Woodrow Wilson travels to Europe to participate then in this treaty discussion. These treaty discussions, they occur at the Palace of Versailles in southern France, or not southern France, but just south of Paris, at the Palace of Versailles. So the treaty is then known as the Treaty of Versailles. So Wilson's 14 points become important as Wilson arrives at the Treaty of Versailles discussions. The leaders of Britain, the leaders of France, are somewhat confused by Woodrow Wilson's suggestions. They kind of expect him to kind of be a backhanded leader, or at least a backseat leader. They wanted to, since the United States got into this war late and only participated for about a year, the United States was they didn't give Wilson the respect that Wilson felt he deserved. As Wilson discusses his 14 points, the French leader says Wilson, God himself, only had 10, suggesting, who do you think you are with your 14 ideas? We're going to settle this because this is our war. So the peace conference begins at this Palace of Versailles, and the big four, we have Wilson from the United States, we have Orlando from Italy, Lloyd George from Britain, and Clemescu from France, and they are discussing in this room here, this grand hall, they are discussing peace options. Now, the Germans, neither the Germans nor the Russians were even invited to the conference. Remember that Russia now is being run by the communists, and they've already arranged for peace with Germany. So Germany is the loser of this conflict, and they're not even invited to the peace conference. So despite Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, some of the results here of the treaty, France and the British really wanted to punish Germany. So Germany had to, number one, accept the blame for starting the war. Germany had to pay billions in war reparations, the damage for the damage that was done. Germany could not have any submarines, and Germany could not have an air force. She could have a navy, but only 6 battleships. In addition, Germany was not allowed to place any troops in the Rhineland, and Germany lost territory. Germany's colonies were given to Britain and France, and Germany could not join the League of Nations. So take a look then at this map, and these are the possessions that Germany lost. So Germany cannot place troops in the Rhineland. Germany loses the Alsace-Lorraine. Germany loses some of this land, and Germany loses the Sudetenland, which is the western part of Czechoslovakia. So Germany then also has to pay huge amounts of money. Germany can no longer have a military. Now all of this kind of sets the stage for Hitler's rise in population or popularity during the 1920s. So Woodrow Wilson was against all of this, but the leaders of France and Britain really didn't listen to Wilson, and so then during the Great Depression of the 1930s, this kind of extreme punishment of Germany leads to Hitler's gain in popularity. That concludes the video presentation for Chapter 29 and 30 for World War I. Just a reminder that all the images within this presentation are in the public domain, and please don't hesitate to email or call if you have any questions. Thank you.